We're in the second blessing of the Amidah of the resurrection of the dead. And we speak in this context, we speak about the attribute of power, of justice. Resurrecting the dead. And we speak about he sustains life with chesed, v'chalkel chaim b'chesed, machayim esim b'rachmim rabim, which we discussed. He resurrects the dead with abundant mercy, not just with mercy, abundant mercy. Very rarely do you find the word rabim associated with mercy. God is merciful. It's with great abundance. And then we speak about, as I explained yesterday, but to facilitate the end goal, that a person should be able to live out his life, somech noflim, he supports the fallen, rofei cholim, heals the sick, umatir asurim, and he frees the imprisoned. So yesterday we were discussing, in today's day and age, how many people are incarcerated? We say, every one of us says, God releases the imprisoned. We read in Pirkei Avos, Ein lucha ben chorin el misha osik b'talmud Torah. Who is the true free man? The person who engages in the study of Torah. What is it based upon? This week's parsha, this week's portion. We speak about the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, the Torah says, were charus ala luchos. They were engraved, they were etched into the stone tablets. The word charus, the vowels cause it to be read, charus, which means engraved. But if you remove those vowels and you just read the letters, it can be read cherus. Cherus means freedom. And what is the takeaway from that? What we should learn, that the 10 Commandments, you engage in it, you study it, you become a free man. Who is the true free man? The one who engages in the study of Torah. What does that mean? What do you mean you're a free man? Most people, 99.9% of the people, what dictates their lives? What drives advancement in society, development? It's self-interest. To make life easier, more pleasant, more pleasurable. We discussed. At one time, just for the basic maintenance of a person's life, you were occupied 18 hours a day, whether it was processing the food, washing the clothing, maintaining a household. It was time consuming. The person's whole life was totally consumed in this. You had no leisure time. You had no time for anything but this. All the advancements in all the areas of technology, all of a sudden life became a lot easier, less complicated. You don't have to go out, collect wood to fuel an oven and to fire the oven to be able to cook. Regardless of what level of society you're at, these conveniences are available to everyone. So we have endless hours of time. What do we do with this time? We look to do things. A person earns money. Why do we want more money? Why do we want to have a greater degree of earning power? Of course, to make more things available to us, whether it's residence, whether it's clothing, whether it's objects, whether it's travel, it's all to accommodate our physical needs, to increase our level of pleasure and the amenities of life, which aren't necessarily necessities. They're not necessities. And everybody setting the bar at whatever level, that becomes a necessity. I must travel at least 3 times a year. I must stay at a 5-star hotel. I cannot wear anything less than whatever that grade clothing may be. Because if you set the bar, that becomes the standard. So your whole drive in life is to accommodate that standard that you set for yourself. Social peers. If you want to be accepted by a certain echelon of society. But if financially you're not there, you can't have the relationship with those people because they're not going to look at you. So what's your drive to achieve that level of financial success? To be able to be valued by that echelon of society. So you should be seen part of that peer group. So again, what's driving you? Your desires, your ego, and your self-interests. What about a person somehow comes to a level of clarity where he sees that that's not what life's all about? There are more important things in life. Helping others at many levels. Using your intellect to come upon discoveries to advance the quality of society, the quality of life in its truest sense. It's a whole different reality of what you're doing. You're altruistic. How many people are altruistic? But the Torah reveals through the word cherus or charus that the only way you're able to come to an understanding of what's truly meaningful and value is only through the study of Torah. Because as the Talmud says, number of locations, the only antidote to the evil inclination, which we're inclined to follow him, because that's the essence of a human being, is only through the study of Torah. That somehow incapacitates him and allows us to make that objective evaluation to come upon the truth of whatever that may be. We're slaves. There's an expression, you're the slave of your desires. You don't hear that word any longer. You don't hear a lot of words. We're slaves of our desires. You have people, they vacation, and after they vacation, they need another vacation. Of course, since they have such a limited time to vacation, because they have to get back to what we call the rat race, which they work 18 hours a day. They're workaholics. So they don't have time. So they have to really condense it into 5 days, and they vacation intensely for 5 days. But the vacation itself is not a vacation because it's going at 1,000 RPMs a second. That's how you experience that vacation. So what is life? From A to Z, whether it's work, vacation, family time, everything is under the title rat race. That's what it is. You're on that treadmill. You know, the mouse on the treadmill just keeps going over and over again. Can't get off. Hashem is matir asurim. As a human being, naturally, we are slaves of our desire. That he allows you, he releases you from those shackles and gives you clarity to be able to maximize on your life. That itself, he frees you. He frees the imprisoned. We're prisoners of our desires. Now, the Midrash tells us, and I mentioned this in the past, the wise, as they get older, they become wiser. And the fools, as they get older, they become more foolish. Why? So we discussed in the past that as much as you're a wise person and you have understandings and you're able to fully comprehend value, but simultaneously, when you're a younger person, we have all kinds of physical drives. We have all kinds of energies that we have to deal with. We have a chemistry within our bodies. That chemistry somehow doesn't allow us to maximize on what we understand is truly beneficial to us. Because we're preoccupied with accommodating what the chemical activity in our bodies drive us towards. What happens as you get older? And all that starts waning. And you're no longer overwhelmed with all that. And you're no longer distracted with all that. So what you understand now, you have less interference. Having less interference, you have greater clarity. Once you have greater clarity, you become wiser. So the wise, as they age, become wiser, not only due to their experience, but due to less interference. The fools, a person is a fool. He likes to come back every night with his buddies. He has the towel over his shoulder. He goes bowling. He drinks his Ballantine Rheingold beer. That's what he does every day. But he realizes, he has to go to work every day because he has to support a family. As he gets older and he's no longer able to assume certain responsibilities, which are basic responsibilities of every responsible human being, so what is he left with? He's left with his foolishness. He can't act and doesn't function within a constructive system because he can no longer be contributing. He's no longer a contributor. He needs a caretaker. So in that state of being cared for, and all you have is your perspective and reality of who you are. So who is he? He's a person who doesn't have wisdom. He has no interest in anything of true value. So as he gets older, he becomes more foolish because he's not forced to be in a setting which is productive and constructive. His whole setting is only his essence, which is that same foolishness. So the foolishness intensifies and becomes exaggerated. You ever see people, they're pretty difficult to deal with when they're young. When they get older, they become impossible. But what you see when they're old is really what they had when they're younger, except when they were younger, they couldn't behave that way because they're able to control it. But as a person gets older, you don't have that self-control for many reasons. So then you see it in its true color. That all those negative characteristics, behavior patterns now are full-blown. Full-blown, you don't want to be associated with that person. It's the same idea. As the fool gets older, he becomes more foolish for that reason. It's no longer under wraps because he no longer is forced to behave responsibly and to be productive as he was when he could be productive. Hashem is Matir Asurim. He frees the imprisoned. Main imprisonment is we're all prisoners of our own drives, perspectives. There's a famous Avos the Reb Nosson, it's the equivalent of Pirkei Avos. He says, Ein Adam meis v'chatzi tavos biyado. A person, when he dies, he hasn't even fulfilled 50% of his aspiration and desires. You understand what's going on here? A person is so driven to fulfill his aspiration and desires, when he dies, even if he dies at 90 years old, he hasn't even fulfilled 50% of them. Not even. So if that is the inner drive and you're short 50%, so what was the degree of continuously being overwhelmed with? Where were you being drawn? You're drawn towards to satisfy whatever that was, those desires. There's no greater distraction in life than that. So how is a person able to even function or do anything? The answer is Hashem's Matir Asurim. He intervenes, he neutralizes it. Because all humanity would not be productive otherwise. He heals the sick. Many of the therapies we have today and medications, it's only because people the life expectancy has increased. When, in the 1500s, the life expectancy in most societies was 40 years old. 40 years old, person passed away, whether it was from a stroke, a heart attack, one-time event, he's no longer here. All of a sudden, life expectancy starts increasing. for many reasons, whatever. 50, 60, 70, 80. 80 is not that old. You can be fully functional, but you realize if the body exists for 80 years with all the experiences, the wear and tear, whether it's the joints, whether it's the chemistry, whether it's the pancreas, whatever it may be, eventually gives out. So they have to be medical approaches to address all these deficiencies because you're on overrun here. You're running on empty for years and you keep draining the system. So we have to somehow create some kind of counter approach, remedy to maintain the system. Many years ago, I went to a doctor. He was an MD. He was an Oriental. He was an expert in Chinese medicine. He did acupuncture, many other things. And he said to me that, what do you think people that diabetes has increased to such a degree? It's out of proportion. He says the human body was created to process a certain amount of food. What happens if you overtax the pancreas, like the American diet, and people eat beyond their capacity? That means the pancreas is on overload for endless years. Eventually, it gives out. When it starts not producing the insulin that it's supposed to produce, then you have a problem. That's the beginning. That's diabetes. Late onset diabetes due to weight and not exercise and not eating right. It's all the same thing. You deplete it. You deplete the system starts failing. Rofei cholim. But God nevertheless provides remedies for that, though these physical deficiencies, whether it's medication, whether it's vitamins, whether it's therapies. So the Rofei cholim is not only a person who recovers from an illness, even to maintain a setting, a situation, the person should not succumb to whatever that illness may be, whatever that deficiency may be. There was a certain person who was involved with Yad Avram, very special man. He himself was an ophthalmologist. And he was a patient of Dr. Alan Spiegel, who's a cardiologist. And even though he had a pacemaker and he had a defibrillator within him, his heart muscle was so weak that without this certain medication, just a few years earlier, he couldn't have lived. But because they came out with a certain medication which compensated for the weak heart muscle, he lived in the extra few years. Otherwise, he wouldn't have those extra years. So providing that's Rofei cholim. It's addressing the illness, addressing the deficiency. And everything, this is God providing. He's Rofei cholim. Umatir asurim. And he fulfills his emunah, his level of integrity to those who sleep in the dust. It doesn't say those who died, those who are sleeping in the dust. Lishenei ofer. What does it mean, those who are sleeping? You know, a person is lying in bed and he's sleeping. And when he sleeps, it's at a level of such stillness that sometimes you have to go over and feel his pulse and see if he's alive, or put a feather by his nose to see if there's any air coming out of his nostril. And sure, he's alive, but he looks like he's not alive. But why is he conscious? He's not in a coma. The answer, he's sleeping. The person sleeps, he sleeps sufficiently, he naturally awakens. God resurrects, he fulfills and is committed to his level of commitment that he will awaken those who are sleeping in the dust. So what does that mean? When a person has died and is going to be resurrected, that's only a temporary status. It's like a person who's sleeping. He's temporarily not conscious and not fully functional when the person's in this dormant state. That is exactly what resurrection is. But who does he resurrect? Those who are sleeping in the dust. The Talmud tells us there are a number of people who will not merit resurrection because of their level of transgression. Will not merit. So when they go and they die and they go into the dust, these people do more than sleeping. That's the end. That's the end of the story. That's the permanent residence. The permanent residence is the grave. They're not coming out of the grave. But a person who's worthy to be resurrected, what is that state of the grave? It's the equivalent of a person sleeping. So therefore, when we speak about resurrection, those who are sleeping. There's a story that's happened in the early 1800s. In most communities in Europe, even today in Israel, if you want to buy a grave plot, you have to purchase it from the Chevra Kadisha. This is the group of people who's responsible for the burial of the dead in this particular cemetery. And you have to purchase it from them. The costs, maintenance costs, cemetery, these people have to have salaries because they're involved with preparing the body for burial and for the actual digging of the grave in the olden days and all this. And when you buy a grave, the grave has a certain market price, like any commodity. This person goes and buys a grave from the Chevra Kadisha, from this group of people who oversee the burial in the community, and he realizes they overcharged him 4 times the going price. They duped him. So he went and took him to a din Torah. He went to the chief rabbi, who was Rabbi Kiva Eger of the community, says, I want to summon these people, subpoena them to court. They stole from me, they cheated me, they overcharged me 4 times the going price of a grave. If they did, he has a claim. They have to return the money to him. It's considered thievery. Comes to Rabbi Kiva Eger, and Rabbi Kiva Eger hears him largest complaint that he deserves a reimbursement, and there's no reason he should pay more than anyone else pays. But he was convinced when he paid, that was the cost of the grave. Now this person, he was a usurer. He was a money lender, and he lent money with ribbis, with interest. The Gemara tells us a person who's involved in usury, in interest, and very much committed to this is his livelihood, and afro nina tchisa mesim. His dust will not awaken at the time of resurrection. This man, as they say, when he bites the dust, he's not coming back. That's the reality. So this person, Reb Kiva Eger said to him, he says, you don't understand. For everybody else, the price is a quarter, because when they buy the grave, it's really only a rental. It's a temporary situation. When you go to the grave, because you're a usurer, it's permanent. So permanent residence is 4 times the price of a temporary residence. But what the person who's meant to be resurrected, how is he depicted? What's his classification? He's sleeping in the dust. It's a temporary situation. He has to be awoken. The process of being awoken, that's called resurrection. That's the process. Then we conclude. Micha mocha bal gvuros. Who is your equivalent? The one of all power, all powerful. Gvura is strength. You are bal gvuros. You are the one who has all power. Umi domalach. Who is like you, who could be compared to you? In what context? Melech. You are the king. Memis, you bring about death. But although you take lives, that same life is restored. It's memis umechayer. And he will bring that budding, that flourishing of the salvation, which ultimately will come through the resurrection. So again, within the context of resurrection, he's called Melech. Memis, the king has the power to issue a death sentence. God gives life, he takes life. It's yours to give, it's yours to take. And he brings back to life. And the process of the budding that ultimately comes there, he's the one who actually causes the Yeshua, the salvation to bud and blossom and happen. Now, in terms of, we speak about mercy killings, euthanasia, all this. A person is in a certain setting. You only live. Now, who's the one who endows life? God. If God has chosen not to take life, how does a person have a right to play God and say, I feel the person should no longer live? I think it's not worth the suffering he's going through. Therefore, I will take his life. Since when does the human being have a right to play God? God gives and God takes. And if God didn't indicate you should take, you have the right to take that person's life, regardless of his pain. It's considered murder. Moshe Feinstein rules. He was the size of a generation. A heart transplant. Are you permitted to take a heart? A person is an organ donor, and he donates his heart for whatever it is for a person who needs a heart. And there's a whole registry. People need heart transplants. The moment the person is about to pass away, they take the heart out of his body, and they preserve it for the moment, and they send it off to that location, wherever that person is. Or that person has to come to the closest location where that heart will be available to that person. The law is that according to Jewish law, that if the person is still alive, even through artificially alive, although you don't detect any brain waves, any brain movement, taking the heart out of that person and causing him to be alive is called murder. That's called killing. So according to halacha, since the heart only has value when you take it out when the person is still alive, meaning it's beating, in essence, you're killing that person to save the life of another person. Halachically, you're not permitted to take a life to save a life. So you would not be permitted to do this. Who's comparable to you? Who's as great as you? And we're having the audience with this being who's at a level, nothing's comparable to him. And specifically in this context, he takes life and gives life. There's nothing more precious than life. You see, there's so many variables and aspects of this to appreciate it. What's the value of a moment of life if it's utilized properly? Eternity. So when God gives life, what does that mean? That's endless moments of eternity, that every moment it's valued. If you utilize it properly, there's not enough reward in this existence to compensate the person for the value of that action. So if you multiply it endless times over during a lifetime, what did God provide? This is Gomel Chasudim Tovim. He's given you an accommodation, which there's nothing comparable to that accommodation. And who has given it to you? The King of the universe, the Creator. And you think for yourself, here he's offering me this opportunity allowing me to utilize this time in this most special way, and I'm just squandering it. I'm whittling it away, wasting it. Because you realize God's going to take you. Everybody has his day. Man doesn't live forever. We don't think about it. That's why people, they don't wake up. And even when they're at the end of their lives, people are so out of touch with the reality of liability and consequence, they just fade out. And that's the way their lives end. You know, many years ago, I read an article in the New York Times, at least 30 years ago. When I realized that it dirtied my hands, I stopped buying it. That's one of the reasons why I stopped buying it. Wednesday, they had a science section. So in the science section they had, there's a community in California. It's called Venice, where they took high school children, students, and they would take them to a mortuary, to a funeral parlor. And they wanted them to see the corpses being embalmed and being prepared for burial. Could you imagine? These are high school children, 14, 15, 16-year-old kids. Why? So they should not fear death. They should see what it means to die, and they shouldn't fear it, because it's unhealthy to fear death. See it as what it is, nothing to be afraid of. Sensitize them to this. It's not something you have to be fearful, or you'll be traumatized with it. No nightmares. When I read it, it's insanity. We have all kinds of safeguards in our lives. One of them is a conscience. What's the conscience? Because someday you're going to pay the price. You're going to die. You know, there's nothing to be afraid of dying. Do you know what the suicide rate in the United States is? Among the young people? Sure. Because they don't see any value in their lives. What's the value of life? There's no big deal to die. Dying is easier than to live. Because life is so painful, and if they can't achieve what they want, they can't have that marijuana fix. You know something? If I can't afford the fix, it doesn't pay to hang around. I want to check out. I'm going to check out of this hotel, so to say. I've been here 14, 15 years. It's enough. With the kind of parents I have to see every night, I've had enough. Checkout time, okay? But a person would only know what it means to die, God forbid. And what the value of life is, it's something you hold on dearly. You don't give it up so quickly. And you make every effort, and you don't leave a stone unturned, regardless of how painful, how difficult it is, to allow yourself to continue living. It's melech me misum chaya. Only God has a right to take life and give life. We ourselves, we can't play God. I think it's time to pull the plug. That's murder. That's killing. What about the person that has given consent to pull the plug? Doesn't make a difference. A person's life does not belong to him. God is the sole provider, and he's the proprietor. As it says in Pirkei Avos, he's the balabayas. He's the proprietor. He actually runs the enterprise. He owns the enterprise. Well, players, if we succeed, will be beneficiaries of the system. Otherwise, we all hear the music, God forbid. Melech memis. Only God, the king, makes that decision. Umachayer. And he resurrects, brings back to life. Umatzvi cheshua. And the process to bring that about, he causes that process to be budding and flourishing and blossoming. And that's when the Mashiach comes, which ultimately will allow resurrection to take place.